Budapest, an EU-Ukraine summit has wrapped up in Kyiv. Ursula von der Leyen praised Ukraine for efforts made towards membership. The EU Commission president said it was impressive that Ukraine was able to do all that while it's been in a state of war. Now, the EU Council President Charles Michel, meanwhile, said a 10 package of sanctions against Russia is currently being worked on. Ukraine's president spoke during that final press conference and said his objective was to start negotiations on membership with the bloc this year.
We spoke of the negotiation processes that will need to be put in place for us to join the European Union. We spoke of a number of issues with the Commission and the Council, and our objective is to start negotiations as of this year. It is our objective, in fact, it is our duty to do so. Today's summit was an opportunity for us to show that Ukraine is making sound progress towards reaching criteria for Europe's single market. We have put in place a number of actions which will enable Ukraine to become a fully fledged member of the European Union.
I'd like to bring in France 24's European Affairs editor Armin Georgia now. Armin, we just heard there from the Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky saying he wants to begin negotiations this year. Is he being a little too ambitious there?
Well, there was an interesting difference between him and his own prime minister, who had said that he thought Ukraine should join within 2 years. But today, Zelensky didn't say that. He simply said he hopes that there would be a start in negotiations this year. He didn't say how long he thinks the whole process should take. So he's being a bit more open-ended about how fast all of this is going to go. In terms of the concrete steps, there's going to be a formal assessment by the European Commission this autumn, so still quite a few months away, as to whether Ukraine is ready to start formal accession talks. So we're still some distance away from even a decision on whether Ukraine should start talks or not, let alone the actual starting of the talks themselves.
Okay, so he's jumping the gun just slightly. Let's talk about the help Europe has given Ukraine over the past year, because I understand some 50 billion euros has been sent or earmarked for Ukraine.
Well, not surprisingly, the EU leaders at this press conference enumerated all the help that is being given now, including obviously financial assistance, the new program to help clear Ukraine of landmines, the facility to train Ukrainian soldiers, so that's a new or relatively new aspect of the whole EU's military help to Ukraine. There was also mention, which I thought was quite interesting in a way, the sort of practical everyday help that Ursula von der Leyen set out, the supply of electricity to Ukraine, but also, it might sound very trivial, but all the things that she said about LED light bulbs being supplied to Ukraine to help energy savings. That's for her an example of small things that can make a big difference, because the EU has certain technologies, because it itself is trying to accelerate its own green transition and invest in these alternative non-carbon intensive industries. So you could see that she was trying to kind of get Ukraine into that fold, in a sense, I suppose, with the idea that one day Ukraine might indeed join the EU and therefore will need to be up to all of these norms that are taken for granted or starting to be inside the European Union.
That's true. We do take it for granted. Even when she was talking about light bulbs, I asked myself why. But now that you mention it, I totally see. Let's talk about the appetite for Ukraine joining the bloc, because this is something both European leaders speaking there mentioned, how that there are 27 states. Clearly, all of them will have to have a say on whether or not Ukraine one day joins the European Union. Considering Ukraine is in a state of war, its economy is largely financed by international assistance, what's the appetite like?
It's pretty hard to imagine a ceremony for Ukraine's actual accession to the EU amid sirens, missiles falling, everyone running to shelters. And actually, Ursula von der Leyen sort of mentioned something along those lines when she said, that she visited somewhere and then everyone had to run to the shelter. So that is the reality of everyday life. I don't think anyone in their true heart of hearts expects Ukraine to actually join the EU while this war is still going on. They may not say that publicly. And there's certainly an acknowledgement, at least tacitly, that this is going to be a very long road ahead. There are certain countries like France, Italy, the Benelux countries that don't want to send an over-optimistic message about how quickly Ukraine is going to join. But despite all of that, I think we can say that over the last year, Delano, as we are getting close to this 1-year anniversary, right, on February the 24th, I think overall we can say that the EU's line on Russia has definitely hardened. I mean, you remember in the first few weeks when we were talking about the first few stages of the war, when there was still telephone diplomacy with Putin, Western leaders were still keeping lines of communications open. Notably, President Macron was talking to Putin quite regularly in the first few weeks, as you'll remember. And now the EU seems to have moved away for anything like that. Instead, they're talking about they didn't mention peace talks with Russia.
Not once.
They didn't mention any kind of de-escalation. So there has been a real shift. Instead, they're now talking about setting up some kind of international center to address alleged war crimes, to address reparations. So it's actually a hardening of the positions. And I think we've seen over this year both the West and Russia actually doubling down after those first few weeks where there was some at least very sort of vague talk of trying to find a diplomatic solution. That really does not seem to be on the table at all now.
Doesn't at all, unfortunately. Thank you very much for that, Armin Georgian there.